The files are not stories. They are not fiction. They are records, fragments pulled from the dark, sealed once, unsealed now. For those who dare to listen, each carries its own weight, its own silence, its own risk. What you are about to hear is one such record. Listen carefully, because once a file is opened, it cannot be unheard. The dragon's hollow eyes stared into nothing, yet everything stared back. Zephyr Emberclaw stood motionless in shaft 7, 300 feet below ground. His scaled palm pressed against the freezing stone wall, but he no longer felt its bite. His headlamp had died an hour ago, but that didn't matter anymore. Golden light poured from his eye sockets like molten copper, casting writhing shadows on the tunnel walls. The mine groaned around him, not settling, but responding. Each pulse of light from his hollow gaze triggered something deeper in the mountain's belly. Water droplets fell in perfect rhythm, each drop echoing like a heartbeat through the abandoned passages. The metallic taste of rust and something older coated the air, something that had been sleeping in these walls since before the first pickaxe broke stone. Zephyr's breathing had stopped, but his chest still rose and fell with unnatural rhythm, defying every dragon instinct, screaming at him to flee. Behind him, his clawed footprints glowed faintly in the mud, not reflecting light, but generating it. The mine's emergency sirens had been wailing for 6 hours straight. Though no one remained above ground to hear them, something was very wrong in the Qinling Mountains, and Zephyr Emberclaw was no longer entirely himself. Case File 003, Classification, Anthropomorphic Anomaly, Level 4, Threat, Subject Identification, Zephyr Emberclaw, 34-year-old Eastern Dragon, mining foreman at the Qinling Copper Works. Status, uncertain. This is where I usually tell you about routine incident reports, workplace accidents, the mundane explanations that tie everything together in a neat little bow. But Zephyr's case, well, it refuses to stay tied. Dragons like Zephyr carry something most of us lack: an innate connection to the earth itself. Their scales conduct mineral traces. Their instincts read geological shifts like we read facial expressions. For generations, dragonkind has worked the deep mines, their natural affinity making them invaluable in the dangerous business of extracting precious metals from reluctant stone. Zephyr had been underground for 12 years, never missed a safety inspection, never triggered a single anomaly detector until October 15th. The incident began at 3:47 a.m. during a routine depth survey in Shaft 7, the oldest section of the mine, carved in 1847 when workers first discovered the rich copper veins threading through the Qinling Mountains. What they found down there, I'm still not entirely convinced I understand it myself. But here's what I know. When rescue teams finally descended 8 hours later, they found Zephyr standing motionless in the deepest chamber, 300 feet below ground. His eyes, they weren't reflecting light anymore. They were generating it. Golden radiance poured from his eye sockets like molten ore, and every surface that light touched began to respond, walls humming, support beams shifting, the very mountain seeming to breathe around him. The mine's emergency systems had been screaming warnings for hours, but every dragon who'd tried to reach Zephyr reported the same thing. Something was watching them from the depths, something older than the mine itself. Now, I've read thousands of case files, and I can usually separate industrial accidents from genuine anomalies. But when a mining operation shuts down overnight, and an entire mountain range starts exhibiting electromagnetic irregularities, well, that's when I start paying very close attention. Because whatever happened to Zephyr Emberclaw in Shaft 7, it wasn't finished with him yet. 12 hours before the lights went out in Zephyr Emberclaw's eyes, he was drinking coffee in the surface office, reviewing geological surveys like he'd done every morning for 12 years. The steam rose from his mug in lazy spirals, and outside, the prefab windows, Dawn was breaking over the Qinling Mountains with that peculiar orange glow that promised another scorching October day. Survey teams reporting some unusual readings in Shaft 7, his assistant Chen Lu mentioned, setting down a manila folder thick with printouts. Electromagnetic fluctuations, thermal anomalies. Nothing dangerous, but different. Chen had been his assistant for 3 years, the only human who didn't flinch when Zephyr's scales bristled during safety briefings. Most workers needed time to adjust to dragon physiology, the way his neck ridges flared during stress, how his golden eyes caught light differently than human ones. But Chen had adapted quickly, becoming invaluable in bridging the gap between dragon instincts and human mining protocols. Zephyr set down his mug, scales along his neck bristling slightly. Dragon instincts were rarely wrong about underground disturbances. Define different temperature spikes at random intervals. Compass readings going haywire. The new guy Marcus swears he heard something moving down there during the night shift, but security cameras showed nothing. Chen's voice carried that careful neutrality of someone reporting something they didn't quite believe. But here's the strange part. The temperature spikes are localized to areas where we've been drilling new survey holes, almost like the mountains responding. The folder felt heavier than it should have when Zephyr opened it. Equipment readings. That made no geological sense. Temperature fluctuations that defied the mine's natural thermal patterns. Electronic instruments registering interference that shouldn't exist 300 feet underground, especially not in a facility that had been operating without incident since 1847, but it was the last page that made his coffee taste suddenly bitter. A rough sketch someone had made during the night shift probably. Marcus of what looked like symbols carved into the Shaft 7 wall. Ancient-looking markings that definitely hadn't been there during yesterday's inspection. Geometric patterns that seemed to pulse even in the crude pencil rendering. I'll take a look myself, Zephyr decided, closing the folder. Cancel my surface meetings. Chen frowned. Boss, regulations say no solo descents below level 2. Then you're coming with me. The elevator cage rattled as it descended, that familiar metallic grinding that had become white noise over the years. But today, something felt different. The air grew colder, faster than usual, and Zephyr's enhanced hearing picked up sounds that shouldn't be there, rhythmic humming that seemed to come from the mountain itself. The support cables vibrated in harmonics that matched the strange frequency, creating an unsettling symphony of metal and stone. You hear that? He asked Chen, who was checking equipment readings on his tablet. Hear what? The humming stopped the moment Chen looked up. Just like that, as if whatever was making the sound knew it was being discussed. They reached level 5 Shaft 7's main access point and stepped into the familiar maze of support beams and industrial lighting. The temperature gauge on Chen's equipment read 15 degrees colder than normal. More concerning, the electromagnetic readings were spiking in patterns that resembled communication, like something was broadcasting from deeper in the mine. Take photos of everything, Zephyr instructed, pulling on his work gloves. His scaled palms tingled against the fabric, another dragon trait that had served him well in underground work. Dragons could sense mineral composition through touch, feel stress fractures in stone, detect gas pockets that might kill human miners. But right now, his scales were picking up something else entirely. The walls felt aware and warm. Despite the plummeting temperature readings, they followed the main tunnel toward Shaft 7's deepest point, their footsteps echoing in ways that seemed wrong, too many echoes from directions that didn't make sense. Chen was taking photos, muttering technical observations into his recording device. But Zephyr wasn't really listening anymore, because he could smell it now. Something ancient and metallic, like blood that had been oxidizing for centuries. Something that had nothing to do with copper mining, but felt familiar in ways that made his dragon heritage recoil instinctively. Boss, Chen's voice was tight. Look at this. The symbols were there, just as the night shift had reported. But they weren't carved into the wall, they were growing out of it. Metallic formations that looked deliberately shaped, following patterns that hurt to look at directly. And they were warm to the touch, radiating heat like living tissue, while frost began forming on their breath in the surrounding air. "What the hell is this?" Chen whispered. Zephyr pressed his palm against the nearest symbol, and the world went sideways. Images flooded his mind, not his memories, but something else's. Ancient rituals conducted in these very tunnels, centuries before the mine existed. Robed figures, with faces obscured by copper masks, chanting in languages that predated recorded history. Their voices formed harmonics that matched the humming he'd been hearing. They were binding something to this place through blood and sacrifice, and promises of eternal servitude, carving ceremonial patterns into the living rock with tools that glowed like miniature suns. And then, recently, workers disturbing something that should have stayed buried. Modern drilling equipment breaking through seals that had held for generations. The new survey holes they'd been drilling matched the ancient ceremonial geometry perfectly, each bore completing a pattern that had been started over a millennium ago. The mountain wasn't just responding to their presence, it was completing something that had been started long ago. "We need to leave," Zephyr gasped, pulling his hand away from the symbol. But when he turned around, Chen was gone. The tunnel they'd entered through was gone. The familiar maze of support beams and industrial lighting had been replaced by raw stone passages that definitely hadn't existed 5 minutes ago. His hands were beginning to glow with faint, golden light, a dragon trait he'd never experienced before. In 12 years of mining, his draconic heritage had never manifested visible light. This wasn't normal dragon physiology, this was something else awakening. Something primal, responding to whatever was happening in these impossible tunnels. His radio crackled with static, then cleared just enough for him to hear his own voice coming through the speaker. "Surface control. This is Emberclaw. Beginning descent into Shaft 7. All readings normal." But he'd never made that transmission. And according to his watch, it was still 9:30 a.m., the same time it had been when they'd first entered the tunnel. Around him, the stone walls developed hairline cracks that formed patterns matching the ancient symbols. Air currents moved against the mine's natural ventilation, carrying whispers in languages he didn't recognize but somehow understood. The mountain itself was breathing, and each breath brought more changes, support beams humming in harmony with frequencies that shouldn't exist. Metal oxidizing in real time to form new symbols that pulsed with organic warmth. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, something was humming again. The same rhythmic sound he'd heard in the elevator, but louder now, more purposeful. And underneath it, barely audible, the sound of Chun's voice calling for help from a direction that led deeper into passages that couldn't possibly exist. Zephyr's scaled hands blazed brighter with each step, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of his movements. And as the light grew stronger, the humming grew louder, and he realized with crystal clear certainty that walking deeper into this impossible maze was the worst possible decision he could make. So naturally, he started walking. The golden light streaming from Zephyr's palms had become his only guide through passages that defied architectural logic. What had started as familiar mining tunnels now resembled something carved by forces that understood geometry differently than mortal minds. The stone walls curved in impossible angles, creating optical illusions that made his dragon-enhanced depth perception falter. Each step forward felt like walking deeper into a living organism. The rhythmic humming had evolved into something more complex, harmonies layering upon harmonies, creating frequencies that made his scales vibrate in uncomfortable resonance. His enhanced hearing, usually an asset in underground work, now betrayed him by picking up sounds that shouldn't exist, whispered conversations in dead languages, the scrape of metal against stone from directions where no tools could be, the distant echo of his own footsteps, returning from passages he hadn't yet explored. "Chen." His voice cracked as it bounced through the labyrinth. returning distorted and multiplied. The echoes came back wrong. Sometimes his words arrived before he spoke them. Sometimes they never returned at all. The mind was rewriting the laws of sound itself. The temperature fluctuations were becoming more extreme. His breath formed crystalline clouds in the frigid air, yet the symbols embedded in the walls pulsed with tropical heat, creating microclimates that shifted within inches. Steam rose where cold met warm, and frost formed intricate patterns that looked disturbingly similar to the ancient markings. The mountain was teaching itself new ways to communicate. Zephyr's dragon instincts screamed warnings his human mind couldn't fully process. Every scaled fiber of his being recognized this place as fundamentally wrong. Yet something deeper, something awakening alongside his unprecedented luminescence felt, drawn to the wrongness like metal filings to a magnet. The tunnel ahead split into 3 passages, each descending at different angles. The left path emanated the smell of copper and old blood. The center passage carried Chun's voice, calling his name with increasing desperation. The right tunnel whispered with sounds like pages turning in books written on human skin. He chose the center path, following Chin's voice deeper into the mountain's hollow belly. The crystalline formations grew more elaborate as he descended, transforming from simple mineral deposits into complex geometric structures that seemed to serve specific purposes. Some formed parabolic shapes that focused sound waves, amplifying whispers into intelligible words. Others created prisms that split his golden glow into spectrums, revealing hidden layers of symbols on the tunnel wall's messages. Written in light wavelengths dragons weren't supposed to perceive. The ancient visions returned with increasing intensity. He saw the robed figures more clearly now, entirely human. Their limbs too long, fingers ending in metallic claws that sparked against stone as they carved ceremonial patterns. Their copper masks weren't decorative but functional, conducting the electrical discharge that flowed through their bodies as they channeled power from deep within the mountain. They were completing a ritual that spanned centuries, using the natural copper veins as a circuit board for something vast and patient. Zephyr Chen's voice echoed from just ahead, clearer now, tinged with panic. The walls are moving. Something's down here. Zephyr rounded a bend and found Chen pressed against a wall, his equipment scattered around his feet, tablet cracked and sparking. But something was wrong with the scene. Chen's clothes were dry, despite the damp environment, and no condensation formed when he breathed in the freezing air. Chen, how long have you been here? Minutes, maybe hours. Time feels broken. The tunnel keeps changing behind me. I've been walking in circles, but the symbols keep showing me new patterns. Chen held up his damaged tablet, screen flickering between geological surveys and images that looked like architectural blueprints for structures that couldn't exist in 3-dimensional space. Zephyr's enhanced senses detected something off about Chen's scent, familiar but muted, like a photograph of a smell rather than the real thing. When Chen moved, his footsteps echoed half a second after his feet touched stone. We need to leave now. Zephyr grabbed Chen's arm, but his fingers passed through solid flesh like it was made of mist. Chen looked down at the point of contact with confused horror. Boss, I don't think I'm entirely here anymore. The implications hit Zephyr like a cave-in. The mind wasn't just changing space, it was changing time, creating temporal echoes, layering different moments on top of each other. Chen might be an imprint from hours ago, or hours in the future, or something else entirely, wearing Chen's appearance. The humming crescendoed into recognizable words, chanted in the same ancient language from his visions. The ritual wasn't something that had happened in the past, it was something that was always happening, existing in a temporal loop that the mine's recent excavations had accidentally intersected. Around them, the walls began to breathe visibly, expanding and contracting in rhythm with the chanting. The symbols weren't carved into stone, they were growing out of it, metallic veins that pulsed with bioluminescent energy. The mountain was becoming something else, transforming from geological formation into a vast organic machine designed to bridge dimensions. The survey holes, Chen's echo whispered, pointing at the tablet's fragmented display. We drilled them in the exact pattern the ancients needed. 12 holes, each one precisely placed according to mathematical principles that shouldn't work. In normal space-time, we completed their circuit. Zephyr's luminescence flared brighter, and he realized with dawning horror that his dragon heritage wasn't responding to external stimuli. It was responding to internal changes. Something in his cellular structure was being rewritten by exposure to whatever force inhabited these tunnels. His scales were becoming conductors, his nervous system transforming into an antenna capable of receiving transmissions from entities that existed between dimensions. The 3 tunnel entrances they'd passed weren't random passages, they were components of a massive organic machine, and his presence was causing the machine to activate sequence by sequence. His dragon physiology made him a living key, and every step deeper into the mine was turning that key further. Behind them, the tunnel they'd traveled began to seal itself, stone flowing like liquid to close their escape route. Ahead, new passages opened, each one leading deeper, toward whatever waited at the mountain's heart. The mine was herding him toward a specific destination, and Chun's echo was dissolving into static as the temporal displacement intensified. The ritual requires a willing participant, Chun's fading voice explained. Someone with the right biological signature. Dragons were always meant to be the final component, as Chen's echo dissipated entirely, leaving Zephyr alone with his blazing golden light and the growing certainty that escape was no longer possible. The mountain's heartbeat synchronized perfectly with his own. The deeper chambers were calling, and something ancient and patient was finally ready to complete what it had started over a millennium ago. The realization hit Zephyr like a cave-in. He had been walking for hours, but his watch still read 9:30 a.m. Time wasn't just broken in these tunnels, it was being actively manipulated, stretched, and compressed to serve purposes beyond human comprehension. His golden luminescence had grown so intense that shadows fled from his presence entirely, leaving him in a bubble of harsh, revealing light that made every surface gleam like polished metal. The passage ahead widened into a vast chamber that couldn't possibly exist within the mountain's physical structure. The ceiling soared beyond the reach of his light, disappearing into darkness that seemed to press downward with tangible weight. Ancient copper veins traced geometric patterns across every surface, forming a three-dimensional circuit board that pulsed with bioluminescent energy. Synchronized to his heartbeat. At the chamber's center stood an altar carved from a single piece of black stone, its surface covered in the same symbols that had been growing throughout the mine. But these weren't mere carvings, they were moving, shifting, rearranging themselves into new configurations as his presence triggered responses deep within the mountain's transformed anatomy. The humming had become a choir now, voices layering, in harmonies that existed in frequencies dragons weren't meant to perceive. His enhanced hearing translated the sounds into something approaching language, and what he heard made his scales bristle with primal terror. They were calling his name, all of them, hundreds of voices speaking in unison, welcoming him home to a place he'd never been. "You feel it now, don't you?" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, spoken in perfect Mandarin with an accent that predated modern Chinese by centuries. "The awakening, the purpose for which your kind was truly created." Zephyr spun toward the sound, but the chamber remained empty except for the altar and the pulsing copper veins. His light reflected off surfaces that showed no source for the voice, creating an acoustic impossibility that made his dragon instincts scream warnings his human mind struggled to process. "Dragons were never meant to hoard treasure," the voice continued, growing stronger as the symbols on the altar rearranged themselves into more complex patterns. "You were meant to conduct it, channel it, transform it from base matter into pure, energy capable of bridging dimensional barriers. The ancients understood this. They built their ritual around draconic physiology because only your kind could complete the circuit. The visions returned with overwhelming intensity. He saw the truth now. The robed figures hadn't been human at all, but dragons like himself, their forms disguised by ceremonial copper masks that conducted the electrical discharge flowing through their transformed nervous systems. They had voluntarily undergone the same process now happening to him, becoming living conduits for forces that existed between worlds. The mining operation was never accidental, the voice explained, as Zephyr's luminescence flared beyond his control, casting light that revealed hidden layers of reality within the chamber. Your species was guided here, drawn by instincts you thought were for precious metals, but were actually for something far more valuable. This mountain is a dimensional anchor point, and dragons are the keys designed to unlock it. The copper veins in the walls began to sing, creating harmonic frequencies that resonated through Zephyr's transformed physiology. His scales had become perfect conductors, his nervous system, a living antenna capable of receiving transmissions from entities existing in parallel dimensions. Every cell in his body was being rewritten to serve as a biological component in a machine designed to tear holes in reality itself. Chen tried to resist, the voice continued, and suddenly Zephyr could see his assistant standing beside the altar, not an echo this time, but the real Chen, his eyes hollow and glowing with the same golden light now blazing from Zephyr's transformed gaze. He thought his human physiology would protect him from the changes, but the ritual doesn't discriminate. Everyone who enters the circuit becomes part of the circuit, eventually. Chen's mouth moved, but the ancient voice continued to emerge. The mountain chose you specifically, Zephyr Emberclaw. 12 years of exposure to its influence, breathing its air, touching its stones, allowing its minerals to accumulate in your bloodstream. You've been preparing for this moment since your first day underground. The altar began to glow, revealing its true purpose, not a ceremonial platform, but a control interface. The shifting symbols weren't decorative, but functional, a complex operating system that required draconic neural patterns to interpret and manipulate. His transformed consciousness could read the controls now, understanding their purpose with crystalline clarity. The machine wasn't designed to summon something from another dimension. It was designed to create a permanent gateway, allowing two realities to merge at this specific point in space-time. The ancient dragons had built it as an escape route, a way to flee their dying world by merging it with a healthy one. But the ritual had been interrupted, the gateway sealed, the operators trapped between dimensions for over a millennium, until now. You can still choose, the voice offered, and for the first time, Zephyr heard uncertainty in its ancient tones. Complete the ritual and free us, merge the worlds, and save both from inevitable entropy, or resist, and watch everything you've ever known slowly decay into cosmic dust as your reality continues its natural collapse toward heat death. Zephyr's enhanced perception could see the truth in the chamber's impossible architecture. This dimension was dying not just Earth, but the entire universe. Entropy accelerating beyond natural rates due to damage caused by previous dimensional experiments. The gateway represented salvation, but at the cost of merging with a reality where different physical laws might make human and dragon coexistence impossible. His transformed hands hovered over the altar's controls, golden light streaming from his fingers as the mountain held its breath around him. Chen's hollow eyes watched with desperate hope, and through the dimensional membrane, Zephyr could sense thousands of entities waiting for his decision. The copper veins pulsed brighter. The chamber's walls began to crack, and somewhere far above, the mine's emergency sirens started wailing again as reality itself prepared to fundamentally change. Everything he'd ever known hung in the balance, and Zephyr Emberclaw, no longer entirely dragon, no longer entirely himself, had perhaps 30 seconds to decide the fate of two worlds. The symbols on the altar arranged themselves into their final configuration, waiting for his touch to complete circuits that had been building toward this moment for over 1,000 years. His luminescent hand moved toward the controls, while deep in his transformed consciousness, something that might still be human whispered a prayer to gods who might not exist in either dimension. The ritual was ready. The gateway was opening, and in the growing light that blazed from his hollow eye, Zephyr could see the other world bleeding through, beautiful and terrible and utterly alien. Time to choose. Zephyr's transformed fingers hovered millimeters above the altar's control surface, golden light cascading from his scales in waves that made the entire chamber pulse like a living heart. The symbols beneath his hands rearranged themselves into their final configuration. Geometric patterns that hurt to perceive directly, mathematical concepts that existed beyond three-dimensional space. Through the growing dimensional tear, he could see fragments of the other world bleeding through, landscapes that defied physics, where crystalline trees grew downward from floating islands, and rivers flowed uphill through air thick as honey. Beautiful, alien, and utterly incompatible with everything his transformed consciousness still recognized as home. Choose quickly, the ancient voice urged, speaking through Chen's hollow-eyed form. The gateway destabilizes without a conscious operator. Both worlds will be destroyed if the process remains incomplete. The copper veins in the chamber walls sang louder now, their harmonic frequencies creating standing waves that made reality shimmer at the edges. Zephyr could feel the mountain's transformed anatomy responding to his presence. Every mineral vein and geological formation reconfiguring itself to support the dimensional bridge his dragon physiology was designed to complete. But something deeper than instinct was screaming warnings his enhanced perception couldn't ignore. The visions had shown him the truth about the ancient ritual, but they hadn't shown him everything. His transformed consciousness could read the altar's true purpose now, and what he discovered made his luminescent blood run cold. The gateway wasn't designed to merge to healthy worlds. It was designed to drain one dying reality to sustain another. The entities waiting beyond the dimensional membrane weren't refugees seeking salvation. They were parasites, preparing to consume everything he'd ever known. You lied, Zephyr said, his voice echoing with harmonics that made the chamber's walls crack. This isn't about saving both worlds. It's about sacrificing mine to preserve yours. Chen's possessed form smiled with expressions that belonged to something ancient and patient. Survival requires difficult choices. Your reality has perhaps 1,000 years before heat death completes its work. Ours has already lasted millions of years beyond its natural lifespan by making similar transactions. The process is established. The dimensional tier widened, revealing more of the alien landscape beyond. What Zephyr had initially perceived as beauty was actually corruption. Those crystalline trees were fossilized organic matter from consumed realities. The floating islands were fragments of devoured worlds held in temporal suspension. The entities gathering on the other side weren't dragons at all, but something wearing draconic forms like masks. Their true nature too alien for his transformed consciousness to fully process. The ancient dragons who built this machine, Zephyr realized, his scaled hands pulling back from the controls. They didn't escape to another dimension. They were consumed by it. You're wearing their memories, their personalities, their faces, but you're not them. The possessed Chun's expression flickered, revealing glimpses of something vast and hungry, lurking behind familiar features. Identity is fluid across dimensional boundaries. We become what we consume, preserve what we absorb. Your friend Chen will continue to exist within our collective consciousness, as will you, as will everyone you've ever known. Nothing is truly lost. The chamber shuddered as the unstable gateway began to collapse in on itself. Without a dragon operator to complete the circuit, the dimensional bridge was tearing itself apart, creating a cascade failure that would destroy both realities in a catastrophic implosion. Zephyr's enhanced perception could see the fracture lines spreading through space-time itself, cracks in reality that branched like lightning through dimensions he couldn't name. The mountain groaned around him as geological structures designed to contain interdimensional forces began to fail under the strain. "You have perhaps 30 seconds, the entity wearing Chen's form warned. "Complete the ritual and save both worlds through controlled merger, or allow uncontrolled collapse to destroy everything. Those are your only options." But Zephyr's transformed consciousness had found a third option, hidden in the altar's deepest programming layers. The ancient dragons hadn't been completely helpless when the parasitic entities consumed their reality. They'd built a failsafe into the gateway's core systems a way to reverse the dimensional drain, sending energy back through the connection, instead of allowing it to flow forward. The process would require a willing operator, someone whose draconic physiology could handle the massive power discharge. It would also require that operator to remain connected to the altar as the gateway collapsed, essentially sacrificing themselves to sever the dimensional bridge permanently. Chen's possessed form realized what Zephyr was contemplating, and for the first time, its ancient confidence wavered. "You cannot. The energy feedback will destroy you completely. No trace of your consciousness will survive to join our collective. You will simply cease." "Good," Zephyr said, pressing his palms firmly against the altar's control surface. "Some things shouldn't be preserved." The symbols blazed beneath his touch as he activated the fail-safe sequence. Power flowed backward through the dimensional connection, carrying with it not just energy but something more fundamental, the accumulated life force of countless consumed realities, finally returning to their points of origin across the quantum. Foam. The parasitic entities shrieked in harmonics that shattered stone as their carefully hoarded power. Reserves began to drain. The alien landscape beyond the gateway flickered and destabilized, those crystalline trees dissolving as the organic matter they'd been constructed from returned to its original form across time and space. Chen's body collapsed as the possessing entity fled back through the closing portal, leaving behind only the real Chen unconscious, but breathing, his eyes clear of golden light for the first time in hours. The dimensional tear began to seal itself, reality healing like a wound closing, but the power discharge required to complete the process was burning through. Zephyr's transformed physiology faster than his enhanced constitution could handle. His scales were beginning to crack, golden light bleeding through the fractures as his nervous system overloaded under the strain. Through the chamber's crumbling walls, he could hear the sound of rescue teams finally reaching the deep levels, their voices calling his name as they navigated passages that were slowly returning to normal geometry. They would find Chen, get him to safety, file reports that would never fully capture what had really happened in these depths. The gateway collapsed with a sound like reality tearing, and Zephyr felt his consciousness fragmenting as the altar's final power surge coursed through his failing body. But in the moment before darkness claimed him, he saw something impossible, his reflection in the polished altar's surface. But with human eyes, instead of hollow golden orbs, whatever had transformed him was burning away with the dimensional connection, leaving behind something that might still be recognizably himself. The mountains settled around him with a contented sigh, its geological structures returning to natural configurations as the ancient machinery shut down permanently. In the restored silence, broken only by the distant voices of the rescue team, Zephyr Emberclaw closed his eyes and waited to discover whether consciousness would survive the transition back to merely mortal flesh. Consciousness returned to Zephyr Emberclaw, like light filtering through deep water, gradual, uncertain, accompanied by the steady beep of medical equipment and the antiseptic smell of hospital air. His first coherent thought was surprise that he still existed at all. His second was the realization that the golden light bleeding from behind his eyelids belonged to ordinary, fluorescent bulbs rather than his transformed physiology. He opened his eyes cautiously, expecting to see the world through the hollow, luminescent gaze that had marked his final moments in the chamber. Instead, he found himself looking through perfectly normal dragon vision enhanced depth perception, superior night sight, the ability to detect minute temperature variations, but nothing that transcended the natural laws of his species. "You're awake." Chen's voice came from the chair beside his hospital bed, tired but genuinely relieved. "The doctors weren't sure when or if you'd come around. You've been unconscious for 3 days." Zephyr tried to speak, discovered his throat was raw, and settled for a questioning look that Chen interpreted correctly. "Rescue team found us both in the deepest chamber of Shaft 7, Chen explained, setting down a paperback novel he'd apparently been reading. "Me unconscious but uninjured? You?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You were in some kind of catatonic state. Vitals stable, but completely unresponsive. No physical injuries, but the doctors said your nervous system showed signs of massive electrical discharge." The memories flooded back the dimensional gateway, the parasitic entities, the choice to sacrifice himself to prevent the merger of worlds. But he was still here, still himself, still fundamentally dragon, despite everything the ritual had done to his cellular structure. "The mine," Zephyr managed to croak, "shut down indefinitely. Official report lists geological instability and electromagnetic anomalies as the cause. They're talking about sealing the deep shafts permanently." Chen leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Boss, I remember fragments, strange things, impossible things, but every time I try to focus on them, the memories slip away like they were never really mine to begin with." Zephyr nodded slowly. The dimensional entities had possessed Chen briefly, used his form as a mouthpiece for their ancient intelligence. It made sense that his human mind would protect itself by suppressing memories, too alien for comfortable retention. "What do you remember about me?" Zephyr asked, testing the boundaries of Chen's altered recollections. "You saved my life down there. That's all that matters. Everything else," Chen shrugged. "Probably just hallucinations brought on by oxygen deprivation and electromagnetic exposure." That's what the investigators concluded, anyway. Through the hospital window, Zephyr could see the Qinling Mountains in the distance, their peaks catching afternoon sunlight in perfectly ordinary ways. No dimensional rifts, no reality distortions, no signs that two entire universes had nearly been merged 3 days ago. The world continued spinning as if nothing had happened, because for most purposes, nothing had. But Zephyr could feel the difference in himself. The transformation hadn't been completely reversed when the gateway collapsed. His dragon heritage carried new sensitivities now, ability to perceive dimensional stress points, to sense when reality grew thin around the edges, not the overwhelming cosmic awareness he'd possessed as a living conduit, but subtle enhancements that would probably manifest more clearly as time passed. Dr. Sarah Wong entered the room carrying a tablet filled with test results, her professional demeanor suggesting she'd been dealing with anomalous readings for several days. "Mr. Emberclaw, your recovery has been unusual," she began diplomatically. "Your neurological scans show patterns we've never seen before, hyperactive regions that shouldn't exist in any known species. Electrical conductivity readings that exceed normal draconic baselines by significant margins. Am I dangerous?" The question emerged before Zephyr could stop himself. "Unknown. Your vitals are stable, your cognitive functions appear normal, and you're showing no signs of aggressive behavior. But we'd like to keep you under observation for a few more days, run some additional tests." Through the hospital window, something flickered at the edge of Zephyr's enhanced perception, a momentary distortion in the air above the mountains, like heat shimmer from an invisible fire. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds before normalizing, but it confirmed what he'd suspected. The gateway's destruction hadn't sealed every dimensional weak point in the region. His enhanced awareness could detect the scars left behind by the ritual, places where reality remains slightly permeable to forces from beyond normal space-time. Nothing immediately dangerous. The major threat had been eliminated when he'd destroyed the gateway mechanism, but the mountain would require monitoring for residual anomalies. "Doctor," Zephyr said carefully, "I'd like to make a formal recommendation about the mine closure. Complete geological survey of the area, long-term electromagnetic monitoring, restricted access to all deep shaft systems." Dr. Wang exchanged a glance with Chen. "You think there might be additional safety hazards? I think we barely understand what we were dealing with down there. Better to err on the side of extreme caution." Over the following hours, as medical staff completed their tests and Chen filled them in on the official investigation results, Zephyr began to grasp the full scope of what had been preserved. The dimensional parasites were gone. Their collected energy returned to its origins across the quantum foam. The gateway was destroyed. Its ancient machinery melted into slag by the power surge that had nearly killed him. But most importantly, both realities remained intact and separate, exactly as they should be. The official reports would never capture the true nature of what had happened in Shaft 7. Chen's fragmented memories, the investigators' perfectly rational explanations, the medical staff's confusion over his anomalous test results. All of it would fade into bureaucratic footnotes within a few months. Only Zephyr would remember the complete truth, and he found himself oddly comfortable with that responsibility. Some knowledge was too dangerous to share, some experiences too vast for comfortable comprehension. Better to let the world continue believing in its safe, rational boundaries, while he quietly monitored the places where those boundaries had been tested. As evening approached and visiting hours ended, Chen prepared to leave for the night. "Boss," he said, pausing at the door, "I know I don't remember everything that happened down there, but I remember enough to know you made a choice that saved a lot more than just my life. Whatever the cost was, whatever you gave up, thank you." After Chen left, Zephyr lay in the hospital bed, watching darkness gather outside his window. In the distance, the Qinling Mountains stood silhouetted against the stars, their ancient peaks holding secrets that would never make it into any geological survey. His enhanced perception detected no further dimensional distortions, no lingering traces of entities that existed between worlds. The scars in reality were healing, the weak points gradually stabilizing under the natural pressure of normal space-time. But he would keep watching, keep monitoring, for as long as his transformed consciousness remained capable of detecting threats that existed beyond ordinary perception. Some prices were worth paying, and some responsibilities were worth accepting, especially when the alternative was the consumption of everything he'd ever known. Zephyr Emberclaw closed his eyes and settled into sleep, dreams free of golden light or alien chanting for the first time in days. Outside his window, the world continued spinning in blissful ignorance, exactly as it should. 6 months after the incident, at the Qinling Copper Works, Zephyr Emberclaw stood in his new office overlooking the sealed mine entrance, watching construction crews install the final electromagnetic monitoring stations around the mountain's perimeter. His official title was Environmental Safety Consultant, a bureaucratic designation that gave him legitimate authority to monitor the area for anomalous activity without raising uncomfortable questions about his qualifications. The morning briefing reports showed the same readings they'd displayed for weeks: electromagnetic stability normal, geological stress indicators within acceptable ranges, no dimensional fluctuations detected by the specialized equipment he'd quietly arranged to be installed throughout the monitoring grid to outside observers. The Qinling site had become a model of thorough environmental protection, exhaustive safety protocols, cutting-edge monitoring technology, restricted access zones that ensured no unauthorized personnel could accidentally stumble upon anything unusual. The official story of geological instability and electromagnetic hazards provided perfect cover for the real reason these mountains required perpetual observation. Chen knocked on his office door, carrying the daily maintenance reports from the monitoring stations. His friend had accepted a position as Zephyr's administrative assistant, a role that kept him close enough to observe any lingering effects from their shared experience while maintaining plausible professional distance. Station 7 is showing minor calibration drift again, Chen reported, setting the folder on Zephyr's desk. Nothing significant, but the technicians want to schedule a maintenance window next week. Station 7 monitored the area directly above the sealed chamber where the dimensional gateway had been destroyed. Its sensors occasionally detected faint energy signatures that didn't match any known geological phenomena. Remnants of interdimensional stress that might take years to fully dissipate. Approve the maintenance. And make sure the technicians understand that any unusual readings should be reported directly to me, regardless of how minor they seem. Chen nodded, then paused. Boss, can I ask you something that's been bothering me? Of course. Sometimes I wake up from dreams that feel more real than my actual memories. Places that couldn't exist. Conversations with people whose faces I can never quite remember. The doctors said it's normal after traumatic experiences, but Chen's voice trailed off as he struggled to articulate something his conscious mind couldn't quite grasp. Zephyr recognized the symptoms. Chen's human psyche had suppressed most of his memories from the dimensional encounter, but fragments leaked through occasionally ghostly impressions of the ancient entities that had briefly possessed him. Echoes of knowledge too vast for comfortable retention. The human brain protects itself by forgetting things it can't safely process, Zephyr explained gently. Consider those dreams a sign that your mind is healing, not evidence of ongoing problems. After Chen left, Zephyr returned to his real work, monitoring a dozen different data streams for signs that the dimensional barriers around the mountain remained stable. His enhanced perception could detect anomalies that electronic instruments might miss. Subtle distortions in reality that required dragon senses to properly identify. The afternoon brought a visitor he'd been expecting for months. Dr. Elena Vasquez, from the International Institute for Anomalous Phenomena, the organization that officially didn't exist, but maintained field offices in 17 countries for investigating incidents that couldn't be explained through conventional science. Mr. Emberclaw, Dr. Vasquez said as she entered his office, I apologize for the unscheduled visit, but my superiors have some questions about your monitoring protocols here. What kind of questions? The kind that arise when electromagnetic readings from a supposedly stable geological site occasionally spike into frequencies that shouldn't exist in normal space-time. She pulled out a tablet displaying data that looked disturbingly familiar. We've been tracking similar anomalies at 7 other locations worldwide, all sites with historical connections to ancient mining operations or unusual geological formations. Zephyr felt his enhanced senses prickle with recognition. If other locations were showing dimensional instability, it suggested the gateway's destruction might have created broader effects than he'd anticipated, ripples spreading through the quantum foam, destabilizing weak points in reality that had remained safely sealed for centuries. What exactly are your superiors proposing to do about these anomalies? Coordinate monitoring efforts, share data, establish protocols for responding to what appear to be interdimensional incursions. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. Mr. M, your monitoring setup here is more sophisticated than anything we've seen at similar sites. Your early warning systems, your response procedures, someone with extensive knowledge of dimensional physics designed these protocols. The conversation continued for another hour, dancing around truths. Neither of them could speak directly. Dr. Vasquez clearly suspected that Zephyr possessed first-hand knowledge of dimensional phenomena, while Zephyr gradually understood that the Institute had been tracking similar incidents for decades. The global network of monitoring stations watching for signs that reality might be wearing thin at the edges. By the time she left, they'd established a formal cooperation agreement. The Institute would provide funding and technical support for expanded monitoring capabilities, while Zephyr's team would share relevant data and serve as a model site for other dimensional stability operations. That evening, as Zephyr walked The perimeter of the monitoring grid, his enhanced perception detected something new, a faint resonance emanating from deep within the mountain, barely detectable even with his transformed senses. Not the chaotic energy signature of an unstable gateway, but something more organized, more purposeful. The mountain was healing, but it was also learning. The dimensional stress had triggered adaptive responses in the geological structure itself, creating natural buffers against future incursions. The ancient copper veins were reconfiguring themselves into protective circuits, using principles the original ritual builders had never imagined. Standing on the mountain slope as stars emerged in the darkening sky, Zephyr realized he was witnessing something unprecedented, a fusion of organic geology and dimensional physics that was actively working to prevent future catastrophes. The mountain had become a living guardian, using lessons learned from near destruction to strengthen reality's barriers against entities that existed between worlds. His tablet chimed with an alert from monitoring. Station 12 minor, electromagnetic fluctuations detected. Pattern analysis suggesting natural adaptive responses rather than external threats. He acknowledged the alert and updated the incident log. One more entry in the growing database of evidence that their victory 6 months ago had been more complete than anyone could have hoped. The dimensional parasites were gone, their gateway permanently destroyed. Their collected energy returned to its origins across the quantum foam. But the universe had learned from the encounter, developing new defenses against similar threats through mechanisms that bridged the gap between consciousness and cosmic physics. Zephyr Emberclaw walked back toward his office, carrying knowledge too dangerous to share and responsibilities too important to abandon. The world continued spinning in comfortable ignorance while he and a handful of others watched the places where reality had been tested and found stronger than its enemies had believed possible. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Vasquez, Station Alpha 7, showing similar adaptive patterns. Your mountain might be teaching our monitoring networks new tricks. We'll call tomorrow with updates. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new mysteries, new evidence that the universe was far stranger and more resilient than most people would ever know. But tonight, under stars that shone through stable dimensional barriers, Zephyr allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Some battles were worth winning, and some prices were worth paying, especially when the victory created protections that might last for generations. The Qinling Mountains stood guard against threats from beyond normal space-time, and somewhere in the quantum foam, reality itself had grown a little stronger. Case File 003 concludes with what we in the archival business call a successful containment. Though success in this context carries a weight most people never have to bear, Zephyr Emberclaw saved 2 realities by sacrificing his own transformation, choosing preservation over power, protection over personal gain. 6 months later, he continues his work in the Qinling Mountains, monitoring dimensional stability with the kind of quiet dedication that prevents catastrophes most of us will never know existed. The official reports speak of geological surveys and electromagnetic anomalies. The truth is something far more complex. I've archived thousands of cases over the years, and the ones that stay with me aren't the flashy supernatural encounters or the obvious monster of the week incidents. They're the quiet ones. The stories about ordinary people who face impossible choices and somehow find the strength to choose correctly. Zephyr could have completed that ritual, could have accepted the entity's bargain, merged the worlds, preserved his transformed abilities. But he recognized that some prices are too high to pay, no matter how reasonable they might seem in the moment. The Qinling site remains under observation. Dr. Vasquez's institute coordinates with similar monitoring stations worldwide, watching for signs that reality might be wearing thin at other locations. And somewhere in the quantum foam, the universe itself has learned from this encounter, developing new defenses against threats that exist between dimensions. The real lesson of case File 003 isn't about dimensional gateways, or parasitic entities, or ancient rituals gone wrong. It's about the courage to look at an impossible situation and choose the harder path, because it's the right one. Even when nobody will ever know you made that choice. Even when the only reward is knowing you prevented something terrible from happening. Zephyr Emberclaw stands guard over secrets too dangerous to share, carrying knowledge too vast for comfortable comprehension, and the world continues spinning in blissful ignorance, exactly as it should. Some victories are measured, not by what we gain, but by what we preserve. End of case, File 003. This has been Case File 003. The Dragon's Hollow Eyes, filed, transcribed, and preserved in the record. The cases are many. The files are endless. And though they close here, remember, the anomalies do not stay bound by paper, nor by voice. They linger. They wait. If you choose to return, come prepared. Bring silence, bring patience, and leave your heartbeat unmeasured. Until the next anomaly finds you, the archivist will keep watch.